This is Dance Studio 411, where we answer your real life questions about your toughest studio life predicaments, parent problems, teacher turnover, student challenges, policy dilemmas, and so much more. Let's talk about what's keeping you awake at night and what you can do about it. Here are your hosts, Suzanne Blake Garrity and Jill Tirone.
Welcome to this episode of the Dance Studio 411 podcast. I'm Jill Tirone. I'm here with Shanna Kirkpatrick, and I'm very excited because she's going to be sharing all good tips on getting the gift of feedback from your families in your dance studios. So welcome, Shanna.
Hi, Jill. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Thanks. We met you at our Energize conference. You've been involved with our dance studio owner members, and we just recorded a training that we're going to provide to our membership. But I wanted to take this content because it's so good, and I wanted to bring it to our listeners of the podcast today. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about you, give your background, and then we're going to dive right in on the great points that you have today about talking about getting feedback and really taking that feedback to heart when it comes to growing in your dance studio.
Yes. Well, I've been a studio owner like your listeners for 19 years in Friendswood, Texas, right outside of Houston. We have 3 locations that we run, and we have over 50 employees. And just on my journey, I have learned a lot about feedback, running a large school with a large staff, and it hasn't always been something that I've been great at, but have learned a lot about and been on a pursuit of in the last few years of my leadership of the studio.
Amazing. So I love how you touched on the fact that maybe you weren't always so good at it. And I think that's important because as leaders, we want to grow and we want to do things better, and we can do that with feedback. So why don't we start with talking first about why we should crave feedback as business owners, as dance studio owners? Why is it that we really want this feedback?
I would say anyone who wants to improve their business needs to be tenacious about receiving and sifting through feedback. I think that growth doesn't have to look like numbers growth or financial growth, of course, but if you want to put out a better product, then you need to be pursuing feedback. We're kind of robbing ourselves when we don't pursue it, don't accept it with a healthy position, and when we don't implement some of that feedback, the only person missing out is us.
Definitely. And so why does it seem like it's very hard to receive feedback, both as, just personally or as business owners and studio owners? What makes it so hard?
Yeah, I think just fundamentally, studio owners are artists. We got into this because we were probably dancers. So a lot of us are very much feelers. And what we're putting out is very personal. We are not running the car wash in town. We are not bankers. We are putting our heart and our soul into our product, whether that is on stage or whether that is a legacy that we're trying to leave in our community through kids. And so when we receive feedback, a lot of times we take it as so super personal because it is personal. We're putting so much of our person into our dance studios. And so that's probably the biggest reason why it's hard for studio owners to take feedback in a healthy way.
Yeah, it is definitely difficult. And I like the fact that you are really acknowledging us as artists and how sensitive and creative we are, because there are a lot of hard parts about owning a business. And honestly, the more you do this, it's like exercising a muscle, right? The more you do it, I think the better you will be at this. And that ties right into one of the other points I want to ask you about are some of the best practices for giving feedback and receiving it. And in our recording that we did for our members, you actually solicit feedback from your faculty and staff. So this can go both ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be always only for feedback from the people who are in your studio, as far as the parents, the students, the people paying the bills, but the actual faculty and staff that you have supporting you. So tell us a little bit about that and some of the best practices about giving and receiving the feedback.
Yeah, I think that it is kind of a mark of a leader, and a way to wow your staff is by asking them for feedback on yourself. I mean, what bosses really do that? I don't think I ever had a boss who did that. And so I think it's a really great practice for us to find a way that we can dip our toe in the water and take that next step of actually soliciting feedback from people in our staff in an appropriate way, the people probably closest to you, probably not the brand new 1 hour a week dance teacher, but the people who know you the best and who this will come off well with. Asking them for feedback about how you're doing. And you can be very formal about it, like we talk about one of my strategies I used years ago, or you can just be very casual about it through conversations. So that is something for us to do and to solicit it. Also with our parents, finding ways to do a level of feedback that doesn't invite too much, but that also shows your parents that you do care and that you do listen and that you do something with the things that they tell you every once in a while. Just the healthy amount of respect that comes from that. When you're giving feedback, because that is what we should do as studio owners and as employers. If you have a team working for you, you want to better them for your students and for themselves. You're a part of their employment journey. And whether they're, career with you or they're just passing through on the way to something else, you can add value to them. So in the podcast, we talk about, or in the presentation, we talk about how to do that clearly, regularly, and we even give some vocabulary and lines because those are so important. What do you say that comes across in a healthy, kind, and generous way whenever you're giving feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. And this can be as something as simple and easy as a Google form, correct? So you don't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be something that's really hard to put together or over the top. And you even mentioned sometimes you could just have it in conversation in passing and asking for some feedback. So again, it doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be fancy. It could just be a very simple way. And can you, I would love for you to share the example of what happened with you that caused you to take the feedback that you received and how you actually made changes in your studio. Would you share that with our listeners today? Because this was a great example of how growth comes from feedback.
Yeah. So I think every year over my 19-year journey, I've developed thicker skin when it comes to feedback. But the most amount of growth happened a couple of years ago whenever I had a small group of dancers leave my competitive program for another program. And I just kind of got tenacious at that point. I got every mom in that group and the ones who were staying, some of them, on the phone. I said, I want to have a conversation with you. I want to hear what's going on in your family and in your dancer's life and, what I can learn from this. So I took pages and pages of notes. I probably spent over 10 hours on the phone with them, not trying to change their minds at all, but just trying to hear and to listen. And through that, some really great things. There were some things that they brought forth that I was able to say, yeah, I'm not going to do much with that. That doesn't align with my studio's values. That's not where I want to go. You probably are going to the place for that in your transition. There were other pieces of feedback that made me believe in what I believe in even more. And I dug deeper in the values of my studio through those conversations, whether because they affirmed them or they didn't agree with them. At the end of those conversations, I knew better the direction and vision of my studio. And then quite a few of those things I show the visual in the training of the strategic plan that I developed with a couple of my key team members based on a lot of their feedback, plus some changes that we were wanting to make anyway. And so we had a year-long strategic plan that was kind of birthed out of that, or definitely expanded because of those conversations. And some of those things were one-time things. And then some of those things are things in perpetuity that we continue to do strategically in that specific program. And one of the examples is that we developed training tracks out of our program so that every dancer could be more seen, heard, and valued inside of our very large school. And I show an example of those training tracks that was birthed out of receiving feedback, even from families who were departing.
That's amazing. So again, a great example of how feedback gave you the opportunity to hear, to listen, and then turn that feedback into something really amazing by expanding into tracks and really giving every opportunity for every student to be seen in your studio. So Shanna, I'm really grateful for your time and your talent. And I'm so happy that you were able to share your expertise today. It takes a big person to admit that feedback is good. It really can be something that allows you to be humble, to look at how you can grow and expand. And I think it's an amazing opportunity as a studio owner. If you're not soliciting for feedback now, this is a great chance for you to do so. And you mentioned very specifically too about how you use your calendar in being able to stay on top of feedback. Can you just share with that for our listeners? And then we'll wrap this up. And
yeah. Oh, I use my Google Calendar for anything and everything. You don't want to see it. It looks very cluttered, but it makes sense to me and it keeps things on track. But one of my strategies, if I receive a piece of feedback or just even just a conversation with a staff member, and I know that they're in a hard place, dropping it on my calendar a week or 2 weeks later to check in with them, or to say, hey, I've been thinking about what you've been saying, what you said to me. That just creates trust and lets them know that I am thinking about them. And then, sometimes on the flip side, if I have been giving them feedback through a corrective conversation that we need to have, I drop that on my calendar a week or 2 weeks later to have a follow-up and wrap up and either say, hey, you're on track, you're doing great, thank you for implementing this correction that I have, or hey, we need to tweak this still a little bit more. I'm not seeing exactly the results that we talked about. So be very intentional with every single thing that comes your way.
That's a perfect place for us to end this podcast today about being intentional with everything that comes your way. So thank you so much, Shanna. I really appreciate all of the feedback that you have given us today.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Dance Studio 411. Visit us online at dancestudio411.com for more great resources and to submit a question for a future episode. Our number one goal is to help you build a successful dance studio business and keep your passion for dance alive.